new movement rose to new heights under the dictatorship of Benito Mussolini. World War I had a devastating effect on the socio-economic state of Italy, which felt betrayed as they didn't receive the lands on the Adriatic coastline they were promised, performed very poorly in the war, and were left in financial ruin. This led to the rise of socialism, and threatened by this, many within the elite decided to give more power to the fascist party instead. Benito Mussolini was its leader, but had little control over the brown shirts or the execution of his ambitious reforms. With the majority of his reforms failing to industrialize the outdated country and the Great Depression only exacerbating the situation, the regime needed a victory to prevent its demise. A plan was hatched to simultaneously invade France and Yugoslavia in 1932, but the information leaked after French intelligence broke the military codes, which forced the Italians to abandon it. The following year was a momentous one which would change the course of European politics forever, as Adolf Hitler was appointed as Germany's Chancellor, again by the elite, worried about the rise of various Marxist parties. Mussolini was firmly against Hitler's Germany as it threatened Austria, so he proposed an alternative take on the League of Nations, the Four-Power Act. Mussolini wanted to bypass the smaller nations and create a bloc of major powers who could stand against international threats and ensure peace. This was initially met with ridicule, but Britain, in particular, considered it after Germany's withdrawal from the League of Nations that same year. Either way, Mussolini still needed a victory, so he turned south, hoping to turn Italy into an empire by avenging one of its most humiliating defeats suffered in 1896 at the Battle of Adwa, where a failed invasion cost Italy over 15,000 troops at the hands of what they regarded as the inferior African nation of Ethiopia. On December 5, 1934, a skirmish between the border guards caused what is now known as the Abyssinia Crisis, a flimsy casus belli for Mussolini to launch his invasion. The Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie appealed to the League of Nations, but the British and French ambassadors who were sent to Rome to discuss terms with Mussolini treated Ethiopia as nothing more than a bargaining chip. At the time, both nations were afraid of what Hitler could do, and they didn't want to risk pushing Mussolini to his camp. Almost a year of failed negotiations ensued, as Italy stalled for time, resulting in little more than the League exonerating both sides on the ground that they both believed that the disputed land was their own. Shortly after, on the 3rd of October 1935, Italy invaded without a declaration of war. Neighbouring Eritrea, which had become the most industrialized region in sub-Saharan Africa, was used as a base, from which the attack was launched, outfitted with railways, roads, airports, harbours, munition depots, and 17 warehouses fully stocked with chemical weapons. 650,000 troops, supported by 2,000 artillery pieces, hundreds of tanks and aircraft, prepared to enter the lands of Ethiopia with orders to specifically target civilians for mass casualties. The Ethiopian emperor mobilized a poorly equipped and trained army of 500,000, with no armored or aerial support. He declared that any man able to carry a spear should head to the capital and be outfitted to defend his country. The League of Nations now denounced Italy and initiated a series of economic sanctions against the kingdom. This was a measure not attempted since Napoleon's continental system, and would test the resolve and efficiency of the organization. But what were these measures, and how did they affect the war? The first proposal was to impose a ban on the arms trade, both to Italy and Ethiopia. Proposal 2 asked all member states to deny private and state loans to Italy, while the third proposal prohibited the importation of all goods from Italy with the exception of gold and silver. And the fourth one banned the exportation of various goods, such as foodstuff, livestock, machinery, and raw materials to Italy. All of these proposals were accepted, but the most important measure, titled Proposal 4A, which added coal, oil, pork, iron and steel to the embargoed exports, was delayed and then denied. Additionally, no one even entertained the idea of Britain or France blocking access to the Suez, which would directly block the thousands of troops pouring into Ethiopia. In the end, the only meaningful effect these economic measures had was to incite an unprecedented amount of support for the regime amongst the Italian populace. Mussolini even led a campaign where he collected the wedding rings of married women as donations for the war, one that even Queen Helena gladly joined. Another measure the League could have taken was to aid Ethiopia, something which occurred in the previous war, where France, and in particular Russia, who wanted to safeguard the African country,
they saddled their horses and mules, harnessed them in the fierce bits of war, and hurried to the chieftain's camp. This was the Abyssinian mobilization, the formation of the famous Patriot Army in its rags and its bare feet, which struck such fear into the Italians and crumbled their resistance behind the battle line, where at Keren and on the Juba River, in Asmara and Harar, the British regular war machine was pounding their wearied troops. And this is the headquarters of the man who at his emperor's command held up the flag of Ethiopian liberty for 5 years. Ras Ababa Aragai, in 1935 and 1936 chief of the Addis Ababa police. A quiet, astute, gentle-voiced officer, incapable of shouting Duce, Duce in any language. One of the bravest men in the modern world. Ababa Aragai has spent the past 5 years never more than 100 miles from Addis Ababa. With a price on his head, he's been wounded in battle half a dozen times. He's foiled more than one Italian expedition of 15,000 men. And now the promised arms are coming. British rifles with British bayonets, all sorts, Martinis, Lee Medfords, Lee Enfields, and American rifles, Springfields. It was a chance shipment from America that gave the first armed impetus to the revolt, and captured Italian rifles in their thousands. Few lost lessons in guerrilla warfare from the Ras Ababa Aragai. Don't be foolish, he says, as many of you were in 1935 and 1936. Don't go en masse in front of their machine guns. In 5 years, we've learned a lesson or two in mountain fighting. The night attack, the war of nerves, and of unnerving shrieks in the dark. The war of light hand grenades stolen from the Italians. The attack on the flank, the ambush from the stern Sangha. That long hair on your heads is the badge of the Arbenya, the Ethiopian guerrilla fighter. It is the outward sign of your form as irregular soldiers. Now into the lorries, troops, rifles, bayonets, provisions and all. And we'll show the Italians what we mean by Ethiopian independence. The Patriot armies whip up their arms, food and drink. Beer made of Abyssinian barley, called tala, and mead made of Abyssinian honey, called cage. Meanwhile, the Ras gives orders to his staff. The women bring small sacks of millet to cook cakes, and the dried peas called shimbara that are Ethiopia's hardest rations. The women and the children are going to battle with the men. The little boy carries his father's rifle until the moment when father thinks that he can draw a bead on an itai. If father dies, then the rifle belongs to the little boy. Mother and son will give father a good Christian burial on the battlefield. They're stoical, but they're optimistic also. Perhaps they think it'll be the Italian who will lie stiff under our independent African stars. And then we'll have another rifle in the family for little brother to carry. Has taught the so-called civilized fascist a lesson in forbearance, decency and dignity. At his palace, the emperor receives the patriot troops of Ras Ababa Aragai, who boast before him in the customary cockwork fukara of the Ethiopian fighting man. Each and all want to tell the emperor of his glorious deeds. How many Italian officers he killed, how many machine guns he took single-handed, how he is his emperor's devoted servant, to be sent to fight the battles of Ethiopia wherever his emperor desires. Then there is the quiet, serious voice of Ababa Aragai. Your Majesty, I never hoped to see the sun of your face again in Ethiopia. I never dreamed that I would once more be happy. I was only determined to fight until I died for our independence, for our flag, for our Christian religion, and for you, my king. England and Ethiopia have a common link in St. George. He is their patron saint as well as ours. 5 years ago, as the black shirts marched into Addis Ababa, the priests of the Coptic cathedral smuggled out of the town the Ark of the Covenant of St. George. It is a famous ark throughout Ethiopia. It is the ark of the national consciousness and of self-defense against aggression. It was with Menelik when he defeated the Italians at Adowa in 1896. It was with Ras Ababa Aragai throughout the Italian occupation. On a cold morning in Addis Ababa, it came back to the cathedral with the emperor and was put once more with hymns and sacred dance in the Holy of Holies. It was a cold morning and it rained, but a right was restored on that day and the chains were struck off the wrists of a whole people.
It is good that you are here to record this picture of me in my palace garden at Addis Ababa. People who see this throughout the world will realize that even in the 20th century, with faith, courage and a just cause, David will still beat Goliath.
At Jijigai in Ethiopia, there was great rejoicing in the capture of tanks. The Abyssinians' method of capturing tanks is as follows. When the Italian crew open their manholes for air, the Ethiopians, hiding in ambush, shoot them down. In this country, the heat inside a tank is sometimes nearly 200 degrees Fahrenheit.